So one of the first questions we often get from our prospects is how to get started with an MDM strategy.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to start with is what is the problem you're trying to solve? Because if you start with the problem, then you know where to go and you can really kind of focus your preceding steps after that.
Yeah, and as far as, starting with the problem, one of the challenges a lot of organizations have is getting funding and budget for the projects, right? And one of the reasons we think they struggle is because a lot of times these are IT-led initiatives, and IT is starting with the how, right? And they're saying we need funding to solve a business problem around a customer 360. But the reality is that the customer 360 or better data, that's the how. That's the thing that they need to get in order to solve a problem, but it's not the problem itself.
Right. Sometimes they'll focus on the goal and that's going to actually solve a problem, but they can't actually figure out the problem. I was at a customer the other day where they had a problem, which is they didn't know how to increase sales and to provide the data that they needed to cross-sell across their organization because they had grown very large. That's the problem set. But they were looking at it and saying, well, no, our problem is MDM. We need more MDM. And I had to make them step back and say, no, your real problem is that for some of your sales guys, they need to see what the entire organization looks like. And then in other organizations, you need to understand how what you sold to company A is going to be valuable to these 5 other companies that are very similar in nature to that company.
Hey, with our customers, a lot of times, MDM is an IT-led initiative initially, and one of the challenges is without a good strategy, it's hard to get business people on board. So what are some of the things you've done that your team does in the field?
Are you thinking more like specific use cases or approaches to implementing?
How about translating or helping our customers identify the real underlying problem?
Yes.
How to focus their MDM consulting effort into solving a problem, right? Whether they know what that problem is or not when we walk in the door.
Yeah, because if your goal is a customer 360, you're not only going to struggle with funding, you're going to struggle with support and adoption and all those other types of things, right? Because marketing could care less about customer 360. They don't even know what that is.
Well, I think the example you just gave about cross-selling is a good one. The other that I would extend it to is compliance. If you think about some of our services customers or financial companies, they're trying to keep that complete visibility so that they're using the customer accounts in the right way at the right time. If you think about EY with their business partner needs, right? That was a big compliance thing. And in fact, a lot of what we're seeing with GDPR is really the same thing now. It's just that understanding of what data is associated with an entity or a person, and then having control over that data so that you know what you can do with it and when you can do it, answering all the W's, the what, the when, the why, the where.
That's right. And also you also want to consolidate that in one location so that users can leverage that data across all their systems, and you're not making very expensive calls to outside services over and over again. And also knowing that somebody has an actual use for that data. Because again, if you look at something and say, look, let's do customer 360, and we're going to spend all this time managing and munging customer, but if the business users aren't going to leverage that, then there's not going to be any ROI at the end of the project.
Right, so customer 360 for the sake of customer 360 is oftentimes a wasted effort, whereas we have 2, 3, 4, whatever specific problems to solve. We need GDPR compliance, we need to better know who our customers are and what their buying habits are so we can market to them. That gives you a focused scope that the business can get behind, and that's the business problem. The customer 360 is how you solve it, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, and also if you define the problem well, you also have an easy way of coming back and measuring the outcome at the end, right? Like if I'm going to deal with, I want to better cross-sell to my customers, well now I can see, well how well did we do where we sold to existing customers additional deals? Or if let's say it's a mailing situation, well we've had 30% returned mails for our catalogs every month. Well, in 6 months I can go back and say, now it's down to 10%. Look at how much money I've saved. If you have actionable things that you can now determine ROI, then it's much easier to sell it back to management that this project's been a success. If you just come back and say, customer 360, we now have more data on customer, then it's very hard to tie that back to success.
So it's not only in your strategy identifying the problem, but also how can you measure improvement and define that up front as a part of your strategy versus waiting to the end and saying, oh, well, budget season's coming. Now we've got to start figuring out how can we prove that this program is valuable, right? So put the effort up front. How are we going to measure what is success? That way you can keep that in mind as you implement and make sure that coming out of it that you can actually demonstrate that.
And also, it's the approach that we really focus on is not boil the ocean, right? If you're going to go in and do a $3 million MDM engagement, the downside of that is you're basically trying to get everybody together and get buy-in. It's very hard to do that. It's just going to be basically like, I'm going to do this big initiative because the CEO said I had to, or the CIO said I had to. Whereas if I go in and I say, I'm going to solve this problem, this small data management problem around customer, and then I solve that problem and show great ROI, then when I have the next problem that I want to bring into the MDM solution, it's much easier to sell that group on it and say, see what we've done here? We can do that same thing for your group. And we get buy-in and we can add to that solution as we move across the organization. I think it's much easier than boiling the ocean up front, especially since it's very hard to determine metrics after you're done with those larger engagements.
Yep.
I think the big challenge with, if you start in reverse of what Tyler was just saying, you're trying to start with a huge, big monolithic project. I was talking with a customer this morning. They said, well, I understand MDM projects take 2 to 3 years. And I was like, well, some may, but the way we've been successful is really breaking that project up into smaller pieces. And then the other way I would avoid starting is really thinking of it as a technology platform that IT owns. It's very much an investment that the business is making. It's kind of like infrastructure and plumbing inside an organization or in your house. Nobody looks for the sexiest plumbing system inside their building, but if you don't have a data management strategy and you don't have a process, then you're going to end up with chaos, just like you would if you didn't have internal plumbing.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to offend some MDM guys, but I definitely think if you approach the problem and say, this is about finding a single version of the truth, and that's your kind of thing, that kind of entails ownership, right? Like there is one way to look at customer, there's one way to look at product, and I think you set yourself up for failure because if you choose a way that is for the initial buyers of that thing, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's management, then you may find that there's a lot of people that you leave out of what that final version of the truth you find is. And so what I think you really want to do is you want to say, I have a problem that can be leveraged by a better truth for our organization. And then that's a much more open and honest way to handle the process because you're just going to say, yeah, there's lots of ways that people are going to view customer or product across the organization, and we'll fold those into our better truth as we move across the organization.
The organizations that do MDM for the sake of MDM, right? We're going to go down this big MDM journey and do MDM for the sake of it because we know it's the right thing. And we're going to try to create one single version of the truth. We're going to try to do the whole thing up front. Those are the projects that take a long time. It's very difficult to get everyone to agree up front. And ultimately, the payback or the time frame between when you start and when you start getting benefit is extended, and it's also very hard to justify the payback when those projects oftentimes are at risk, right? Hey, we're a year and a half in, we're still not getting any value, we don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, maybe this isn't worth it.
Well, and also, if you're going to say this is the single version of the truth, if that's going to be your ROI at the end of the game, the failures are going to be anywhere where there's another truth that's not a part of that single version, right? So it's very easy to kind of prove the negative where like, oh, well, obviously we didn't solve the problem because there's all these other customer applications that have sprung up or product applications across the enterprise.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that the other systems and applications that are already in use are coexisting largely today.
Yeah.
The specific data quality problems or integration challenges that we're going to solve, we don't have to eliminate that duplicity, that potential for conflict. If we can just elevate it and make it transparent and visible, we could actually make people's lives easier just by having that visibility. Right. You can see the 3 different representations of a customer's name, and you now know where those values came from. That is, in and of itself, something that most organizations can't do easily.
Right. I always call it duplication by design, right? Because you actually have those duplicates in those systems usually for a real purpose. Sometimes not, but there are places where people are like, oh, no, we have that customer 3 times because there's actually 3 different divisions we sell that to.
Exactly, yeah.